Hello, friends, and welcome to the June 7th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Adnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. And friends, I want to once again say an enormous thank you to all of you who spent the last 20 weeks of the Texas legislative session hanging out with the Weekly Witness community and the Texas Impact team. I have to say, full disclosure, I am still trying to catch up on sleep after that final weekend that ended on Memorial Day last week. What a crazy few days that was. And we're going to talk more about that, I promise. But not today. So next Monday, we will begin a 6-week legislative wrap-up series. We'll have some special guests who will join us. We're going to be unpacking the final outcomes of the Texas legislature. We're going to be going through where we landed on all of Texas Impact's priorities. And that's scheduled for the next 6 weeks unless the governor and the Texas legislature forces us to adapt. I hope not, but that's the plan for now. One more programming note. We will plan on hosting most of that series by Zoom webinar, but we're going to have a new link starting next week. This link was only good for the legislative session. So check out texasimpact.org and register on the Weekly Witness page to get the new link for upcoming episodes. A couple of those, full disclosure, are going to be pre-recorded and only posted via YouTube and in the podcast feed to accommodate our summer vacations. Yes, spoiler, some of us may plan on spending a few days away from the office, but we do plan on having something posted every Monday, whether it's live or recorded. And we'll let you know a week in advance before that comes. We are still looking for your feedback on future topics you'd like for us to cover during the interim, and we'd love to hear from you if there's still value in doing these live via Zoom webinar. If you have thoughts, please let me know at scott@texasimpact.org. So on to today's episode. After a year break due to COVID-19, Texas Impact is excited to reintroduce the Courts and Ports program, which allows Texans of faith to experience firsthand what is happening at the Texas-Mexico border and share those stories with their congregations and communities. Prior to the COVID break, more than 400 Texans of faith participated in the program and then returned home to share those stories and advocate for a more just system. So joining us today for that conversation are our two Texas Impact staff members who helped the relaunch, who helped plan for the relaunch. We have with us Sarah Cruz, policy specialist. Hey, Sarah. Still muted, but she is waving. And we have with us Sid Earnheart, pastoral fellow. Hey, hello, Sydney. I think I was supposed to say that, right?
Thanks, Scott. Good to see you.
All right. We also have with us two board members. We have with us Reverend Alex Lee-Cornell. Hey, Alex.
Hi, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
And we have with us Reverend Phil Dieke. Hey, Phil.
Good afternoon or morning, wherever you're joining us from. And also Sydney. I never put that together. Sydney is great. We'll have to start sticking with that.
I will say, so if we just want to make fun of Sid for a second, his first email when he was like asking us about a job was Sydney, and we were trying to figure out, not that it was important, but like, you know, what to call him. And so we finally met Sid, and he's like, you can call me either one. So either one works, right, Sid?
Either one, Scott. Either one, of course.
All right. So and I should say that the reason Alex and Phil are with us today is they're two of the members who attended our pilot relaunch trip a couple of weeks ago. And so I'm personally looking forward to hearing some of their stories and hopefully being inspired to go back and visit the border myself. So Sarah, we're going to start out with you today. And I guess I should say along those lines, very successful program, Courts and Ports, and interesting trivia question that I'm just going to go ahead and answer for you. So I was actually leading the last Courts and Ports trip pre-COVID and was driving home on the day that the president gave the Oval Office address shutting down the country. So it's been a little while since we've had these trips. So we might need a reintroduction. Can you help us out. Just start us out today by introducing our listeners to Courts and Ports. What does this new iteration look like? How do you sign up? Why is it important?
Yeah, so the new iteration actually looks just slightly different just because the nature of the situation here at the border has changed and also because of COVID. So, easily people were able, not easily, but people were able to go into the federal court in Brownsville, right, to view the illegal entries. But now that's changed because of the new administration. So, because, they're no longer doing that. So we've kind of pivoted a little bit, and now we're looking at the EOIR immigration courts because that's kind of, where not everything is happening, but a lot is. So, right now that would probably be over WebEx. And so if you were to join a trip now, you would likely see the immigration court. You would also still be able to do some volunteer work. So with Catholic Charities in McAllen, and then also in Brownsville with either the Good Neighbor Settlement House or with Team Brownsville. So those are some of the activities that we have planned, and also kind of just to see how the increase in border security here looks like. So, over one of the last trips that we did recently, we were able to go to the Anzalduas Park, and we saw just a large presence of DPS in the area. And that's a result of, border security and how they've really increased militarization down here. And so, that's kind of what you might experience. It may change week to week just because, like I mentioned, the nature of the situation changes here at the border and policies change all the time. And we're, in anticipation that Title 42 will be lifted, but we don't know how that looks like or what, when that will happen. And so I think it's important for people to come here because you can see, only so much on the news, on social media, and it really helps to see the responses on the ground, for yourself, to see one, how people are responding, see one, maybe what is it that the media isn't showing. So it just really helps, for your point of view, for when you go back to your congregation or your community, to be able to say, I saw this and I think this needs to change and here's why.
Well, I think you're right. It is an ever evolving situation. And like I said, 400 of us have done this trip in the past and things have changed. And I think it's important for people to go back and experience it because one of the things that was most important after my trips was to be able to come back and when people would make kind of outrageous claims about what was happening at the border, you had standing, right? You had experience to be able to say, no, actually, like I was there. I met with these families. I saw what was happening and I didn't experience what you're saying at all. Here's what I saw, right? And so we're going to talk more about that. But Sarah, remind us, how do we go about signing up?
So we have a Courts and Ports page on our website and you can go and sign up there. We already have some dates posted for this Sunday and for, the next upcoming weeks. So you can definitely sign up there. And I also forgot to mention, we still do go into Mexico. We travel to Matamoros and we hear from one of the organizations that has been there responding throughout MPP and even still now.
So TexasMPP.org, click on Courts and Ports. Thanks, Sarah. I want to bring into the conversation now Sid Earnhart, who is a recent Perkins alum. So congratulations, I guess, are still in order, I guess, Sid. With your theological hat on, and I know you have legal experience as well, but combining those experiences in your life, why is it important to you that Texans of Faith participate in Courts and Ports?
Yeah, I would say it's important for Texans of Faith to participate in Courts and Ports, just as we continue to advocate for migrants and asylum seekers at the South Texas border. Advocacy work is vital to justice and transformation work in our communities, yet I think it's one of the areas where many faith communities lack experience and are uncomfortable, quite frankly. Courts and Ports pushes us out of our comfort zone and briefly immerses us in advocacy type settings. And so it's offering a unique way to respond, at least I think, to the need of our immigrant brothers and sisters seeking asylum. And it continues to provide hope and love. And it just helps play this part in God's transformation of our wonderful country, state, and our communities as well. And I think that's really where just Courts and Ports is unique to a lot of other programs and experiences that I've seen both from a legal and I guess kind of a ministerial or pastoral standpoint as well.
Thanks, Sid. I'll bring in the board members now. So you two have both attended courts and ports trips in the past. I know immigration has been in the news over the course of the last few years. And like Sarah mentioned, it's an ever evolving situation. How is it different this time as opposed to when you visited in the past? And I guess, Alex, we'll start with you.
Maybe we should have talked about this. I hadn't gone before. This was the first time I had gone on a courts and ports.
Same.
I'll rephrase then, Alex, for you. I just forgot that. My apologies. So how is it different than what you expected? How about that?
Yeah. So I think kind of what we were saying at the jump. I mean, the border has just become the latest like political football wedge issue. There's so much just kind of outrage and sort of disposed notions, on both sides, quote unquote. And so, I had seen so many, tweets about all of the kind of masses of human suffering that we were going to see. And that's really what I thought we were going to see. And it wasn't, that was not what we discovered. It was not, chaos. It was when we, that's partly because with the new administration, a lot of the border camp had been, cleaned up, and moved to another part of the border where it was not safe for us to cross. But I think, candidly, I expected to feel a lot sort of more kind of unsafe and more, this sort of chaos than we saw.
So Phil, thanks, Alex. So now, Phil, I guess I should remind myself, you had been down before, right?
I had not either, at least not officially with courts and ports.
Got it. All right. So how did it differ from what you expected?
From what I expected, yeah, I think there was kind of a little bit what Alex was saying is that I still expected there to be a whole lot of a conglomeration of folks at the border on the Mexico side, and just walking across the border there and crossing the bridge into Matamoros and not seeing anybody, and for then Sid and Sarah to say like this is where the encampment was, and it to be totally empty. It was a little bit shocking, I guess. But then to walk just a few feet farther and see where the city had put up chain link fence with razor wire at the top of it, blocking off this entire park. And by park, I mean, I don't know how big it was, but it's a pretty massive land space that's blocked off. Even as we walked down to the end of the fencing to try to just look through and like kind of get it up here in there, somebody came and closed the gate. So they were very much not interested in having people anywhere near where the encampment was. But yeah, I was very much surprised by that. I was also really interested just to see the connection points of the people working in Matamoros and then also in Brownsville, and how well there were collaborative work happening both with NGOs, but then also the city of Brownsville. I thought it was really impressive. And maybe this is just my own frustration with some of the city of Dallas and the red tape we've hit there, but I thought it was amazing. And then to meet some organizations in Matamoros that were doing really great work with the migrants who had come up and helping to both provide some housing, but primarily some legal assistance and some social work help as well. And then being able to establish through what was a good neighbor, is that right? Like they were really trying to set up ways they could start tracking people more than just like, here, we're going to help you through, good luck. They really wanted to kind of provide more wraparound services for that. And it was just a really comprehensive collaborative effort. That's the best way I can put it. And I thought it was really inspirational to see how just so many NGOs in the Valley are coming together to work together to try to solve this, rather than everybody kind of sticking to their own guns and say, we're going to do our own thing here. I was really impressed by that.
Somebody asked in the chat if it was permissible to take photographs and videos, and that reminds me, when we did cross the border into Matamoros, but then when we looked at the border from the U.S. side into Reynosa, we started to take pictures, and there was a guard who sort of cracked down on us and did not want us taking any photographs. But I think the other thing that we were sort of reminded of was our, privilege. And,
Totally.
Everybody was saying that, oh, the border is closed, and we didn't have any sort of problems or issues at all. Just, clearly being these, for the most part, like white tourists, so to speak, going back and forth. We were not given any sort of hard time, and I doubt that would have been true if we had darker complexion or sort of different appearance.
So let me loop back in, Sid or Sarah. So I know one of the most meaningful, or I don't know if meaningful, but shocking parts of previous trips was going across and seeing that camp that is now gated off or not there. And I think the first couple of times I went, there were a couple of dozen people who were camping out waiting for the chance to be able to cross. And later trips, they'd say there are 400 or 500 people, like hundreds of people in that spot. So how is it different now? Did it seem different to y'all from your first experience to what's happening now?
I can go first. So like Phil and Alex mentioned, that camp is completely, it's just non-existent anymore. It's almost as if it was never there, right? Other than the fact that they have this wire fence up, which they even extended a little bit more the last time we went. And I'm not entirely sure why. But I do want to say, I went on the Courts and Ports Intensive back in 2019. So that's, one of the main differences that I can see, visually without knowing about the policy. But I do want to say that for the Resource Center for GLADI, for her organization, that's the one that we visit, right? And during maybe the first trip, the one that Alex and Phil joined, there was a group of people out there, not too large. It wasn't like an overwhelming amount of people. But then the second week that we went, so it was maybe about 2-3 weeks later, there was a huge group. So it was about, give or take, maybe 30, 40 people out there, a lot of kids. So, it just shows, yes, the situation's changed. Yes, policy has changed a little bit, but people are still arriving every single day. And, that camp that was in Matamoros, now in Reynosa, that's where you're seeing that camp emerge. I don't know how many people are there right now, but I think that is one of the main differences when you do go to Mexico. Other than that, processing wise, you don't really see the difference. I mean, I went to Progreso a few years back, same kind of thing. Why did you go? Other than, yeah. So that's one of the things I can think of.
I would say just the organization that Sarah is talking about with Gladys, ayudándoles a triunfar, helping people succeed. I mean, that was the most impactful part of the trip for me, was just basically hearing the story of, again, when the whole crisis started, this humanitarian crisis just springing up around the city, and Gladys basically going to work, doing sort of the faithful work of trying to help her neighbors, and food, water, medical assistance, but then also like mental health services as people's time spent there got longer and longer, employment services. I mean, that's one of the sort of academic questions I had, is how is sort of people waiting so long to be processed in these cities like Matamoros and Reynosa going to transform the local economies as they're, sort of in limbo waiting to see if they're going to go across the United States. I mean, they had to figure out a way to house these people and help them pay rent. And we met this woman who would not have been allowed to cross under the Trump administration. Her name was Miriam. She was from Honduras and had basically, we learned her story about how she had been attacked in her home. She had gotten a bunch of stitches in her head. And, fled. She gave birth to a son in Mexico, and then with her son decided to come to the border. And she had been waiting, I think, for 20 months. And that day that we visited, she was given permission to cross into the United States. And Ayudándole a Triunfar was helping with her legal case. And so it was, it was like in the middle of COVID, but seeing Gladys and Miriam give each other hugs and sort of wish each other well, like that was her big day. And then later that day, when we were in Brownsville, we saw her on the other side of the border at the bus station. And that's when we really got a chance to hear more of her story and talk with her. And she was with her son, her year-old son. And that was actually the reason why she was given permission to cross, is because her son had some sort of like bronchial condition, some syndrome that made him a vulnerable case, giving them sort of the exception, the sort of vulnerability exception that the Biden administration has allowed some people to be able to cross under. And so after waiting, for days and days in Matamoros, she was going to wait several more hours with her son in the Brownsville bus station for an overnight bus to the suburbs of Houston, where she was finally going to get a chance to join her other sons there. And so sort of being able to see, and we should pray for Miriam and for her son, but being able to at least see kind of both sides of that part of her journey was very powerful. And I can't say enough good things about Ayudándole a Triunfar in terms of the work that they are doing on a totally comprehensive level, completely from the grassroots, literally just trying to help their neighbors in need that showed up, on their doorstep. So.
Thanks, Alex. So, Phil, I was going to ask, any experiences stick out to you on the trip?
Well, I just wanted to add on to what he's saying about Miriam, because I think her story is the exemplar of why we do Courts and Ports, is because then it put a name and a face to these stories that we hear, vaguely in news articles or whatever the case may be, but to actually get to hear the reality of her story. And I don't know how many of you have traveled with a toddler. It's not what I would call a holy experience. At least it has never been for me. But just to watch her and to see her son there at the bus station, and then the work that the organization was doing at the bus station to provide things for them as a family, both for her as a mom, but then also for him as a son, and to have things for them to do and to equip them. And then also, they weren't going to arrive until 4 a.m. in Houston. Can you imagine being on a Greyhound bus or something similar, like with a toddler? It really put into perspective so many things that you either read about or you kind of know peripherally that are happening, but like to really hear it firsthand was just a pretty incredible experience to then be able to come back and say, well, these things aren't maybe happening or these things are not happening, but like here's one story that we know this is exactly the story that took place. And there's just a lot of power in that. For me, both as a pastor, to then go back to my community and say, this is why we do the work we do in immigration for people like Miriam and her son.
So, and I'll just remind all of our panelists, including myself, because my dogs tend to bark, we'll keep ourselves muted when we're not. We have a running joke every week that the garbage truck tends to run between the noon and 1 o'clock hour at my house, and I'm always hopeful that I'm muted when it goes by because my dogs don't like it. So the stories are important, right? And that's one of the reasons we do these trips, is so that attendees and faith leaders and people of faith can have these stories to understand the policy issues in a real way and be able to explain to people back home what's actually happening, right? Putting a face and a name and a story with the policy area. That said, there are still significant needs from a policy perspective that need to be addressed. Was there anything in your experience that you saw that people should be paying attention to, that we should consider advocating to change?
I mean, I'm going to start out by saying Sarah's definitely the expert in this area. And so I'm going to defer to Sarah in terms of all kinds of detailed policy changes that we should be advocating for, but just very generally from a broad perspective. One of the challenges I think that we heard about down there from a lot of people, specifically the NGOs, was just during the prior administration, there was a sense of, even though we didn't like the policy, you knew what you were going to get. There was consistency with it. And with the current administration, the policy changes. Sometimes it seems like multiple times per week, or at least on a weekly basis. And so that's one of the challenges, at least that I've been hearing about and think related to the current administration is you'll hear this phrase over and over, a lack of transparency as to about what's actually happening. And so I guess I would say for the latest details on what you should be advocating for, you definitely want to defer to Sarah. But if it seems like, even if you go on, I guess I would say it like this maybe, if you go on an early courts and ports trip this summer, and then perhaps you talk with a group who goes later, and you're saying, hey, we were told to advocate on behalf of X, Y, and Z, and it seems like it's changed completely later on, it's because it's still very much a moving target in terms of what the administration is doing and what's, I guess, what we'd be asking people to advocate for.
I'll just go ahead. Yeah. We'll
I said
a second to give us all the right answers. But Alex, anything that you experienced while you were there that you thought was not okay that needed to be changed?
I mean, not that I can sort of say. I think Sid summed it up very well, just in terms of like being there and having this sense of uncertainty and not knowing, what the rules were, kind of obviously feeling much more hopeful than under the previous administration, but still kind of trying to figure things out. And it was like, Miriam had this sort of clear documented case, and thank goodness that she had sort of the legal help and assistance of ayudándoles a triunfar to help her with her case. But then so many others with so many other situations don't have that that support. I mean, I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege as a pastor and just say, I think we can always be advocating to be more welcoming, more compassionate, more hospitable, because what we did see is that the push factors from El Salvador, from Nicaragua, and I can also say this as having experience with the Dallas Convention Center, which was not on the border, but being used basically as a detention center in our own city. I mean, they're still coming. These situations are still real. We need to figure out a way to remember who we are as a country and as a people of faith who are called to give welcome to the stranger and help the least of these.
There we go.
Yeah. Phil, anything to add before I turn it over to Sarah on that piece?
Well, I mean, I assume the majority of people who are listening probably know that at least MPP ended, right? That was a big win whenever the new administration took over the Remain in Mexico policy, and that was why the encampment there in Matamoros was cleared out. But and again, Sarah can speak to this way better than me, but one thing we did learn a lot about was the Title 42 and how they were still using that as a way to kind of not effectively have MPP still in place, but still using it as a policy that probably shouldn't be used in the way that it's being used to keep people in Mexico, and often taking people and shipping them from the valley over to El Paso and then putting them back in Juarez. So there's just a lot of complicated pieces there that we heard bits and pieces about, but I can't probably give a full clear picture of it, and definitely need to do some more research on it. But I'm sure Sarah's had more conversations, as I know she's been in conversation with the Border Patrol since we were there a month ago.
Yeah, and Sarah, I don't want to put you on the spot, because we did talk about this podcast being an introduction to courts and ports, but people will come, they'll experience what's happening at the border. They're not going to become policy experts, but just what are some things that attendees might be looking at from a policy perspective that you can think of that they might learn more about on some of these experiences and be able to take home with them?
I think I wrote a whole thing in the chat here, so I can probably speak to that a little bit more. But one of the things that I think you'll see directly a result of is the Title 42 that's currently in place, right? Because that's why people are still waiting in Mexico, or that's why we're only seeing so many people arrive, because they're doing certain Title 42 exemptions, and those are the people that are going to be able to be processed. But overall, the asylum system is still I guess you can say it's pretty much closed. We're closing a pathway to protection because we still have this order there. If you arrive without valid documents into the U.S., you cannot be processed, right? Unless you have these certain exemptions, unless you're exempted through one of the two processes that are happening under Title 42. But that's something that you'll see on the trip. Maybe you won't see MPP processing because they do that on a very specific day. But some of the things that you could be advocating for is, yes, we need to have a plan to lift Title 42. You need to be asking, when are we going to be lifting Title 42? Because it's supposed to be under a public health rationale. And how much further can we use that as an excuse to block the pathway to asylum, right? Texas is open. So many things are open. And that's from a very biased perspective. But, how long can we use that public health rationale? And it was something that public health experts also argued against. So that, you can advocate for that. And Sid's completely right. I'm not saying that there's no transparency, but we need more answers, right? They're not telling us when this is going to end. Just keep hearing public health rationale. And it's kind of the same thing I mentioned with in the chat with the wall. We were supposed to receive an answer within 60 days, and here we are more than a month later, and we have no plan. And then the next thing is with MPP. So MPP phase 1 has already that's already underwent. They've processed most people at the camp, but we don't know what phase 2 looks like. People were, their case was closed because of in absentia. So things like that. And also just really advocating for the fact that they prioritized the camp in Matamoros so that they can process people there. But then those policies have now created that camp in Reynosa. So it doesn't make sense, it just doesn't make sense.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. And we'll be talking more about these issues in Weekly Witness during the interim. And so we'll get a deeper dive in immigration policy moving forward. But Phil and Alex, I know this is one that you will not punt back to Sarah. Right up your alley, I think. Why should Texans of Faith engage in these conversations? And why is it important for Texans of Faith specifically to participate in programs like Courts and Ports?
Just another kind of takeaway that I had from the trip, we got to observe sentencing proceedings for immigration violators, basically, in immigration court on Zoom, which if somebody was being told that was going to happen at the first iteration of Courts and Ports like 2 years ago, it would have been made their head explode. And what I took away from that is, that there was no bad guy in those, proceedings. The judge wasn't evil. The lawyers weren't evil. There was no in some ways, it was not perfect. I don't think, I think there were some issues with, the law. I think it could have gone better, but it was hard to find a villain in that kind of experience. And so I think there's this narrative that we hear in the media about how our institutions are totally failing and our, democracy is failing, and, that the world is kind of crumbling. And I don't want to downplay or diminish the very real danger that exists, especially for people, that are on the margins. But I think we did, by and large, encounter some people working in law, working in government, that were doing the best that they could, that had skills, and that real skills and gifts that, again, we're trying to do the best they could in the midst of a global pandemic and crisis. And if we buy into this notion that democracy is failing, all our institutions are failing, I think it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's easier to disengage. And so I think Texans of Faith need to have these conversations, because we are part of those institutions, sort of injured as they may be, but still functioning at some level. And if we disengage, if we don't do our part as informed citizens, that does contribute to the decay and the atrophy of the strength of our institutions. And so know that our institutions still work on some level, and that you are part of the institution of democracy working on some level. And so it is important for you to go and participate and engage.
Thanks, Alex. Phil, same question?
Yeah, I'll speak from the United Methodist perspective specifically. And so in our social principles, we have the social community says the rights of immigrants is something that we believe. And even though it's a full paragraph, the end of it says we call on local churches to be in ministry with immigrant families. And so I think it's a question that as local churches we have to ask ourselves is how are we being in ministry with immigrant families? And there are ways to do that here in Dallas, no doubt, but we're also a connectional church, the United Methodist Church is. And so one of the things that we had the opportunity to do while we were down at the Valley was connect with First UMC in McAllen. And so that was a way to create a partnership with another, sister church down in the Valley that's doing incredible work. And they're working with, what was it called? Mercy Chefs? Am I getting that name right? Do y'all remember? Yeah, like Mercy Chefs. And they're working to feed people every day, or I think 5 days a week. So, it's incredible ministry they're doing down there. And while we don't necessarily have a direct hand at the border as a local church, we know we're a connectional ministry. And so our sister churches do. And so how can we be supporting and be in a relationship with them? In the way that we're doing that, and then how can we advocate based on the relationships that we do have? And so whether that's advocating for the conferences down there or advocating for specific churches or individuals that are doing that work, I think that's the biggest part of it is networking. This is a huge networking opportunity where I met incredible people and wonderful ministries that are doing great things. And because of that, then the work that we're doing in like church and society at our local church, like everybody who's on this call has been, I think, on one of my church and society gathering meetings to have conversations about how we can be doing things here in Dallas. And then also more people that were down at the border have joined us to be in those conversations. And so it's a networking, it's a relationship thing. And it's really this idea of advocating for justice for all, which is also in our social principles.
I got to see Phil's dance moves. Phil is a phenomenal dancer.
Yeah, I saw those on Facebook. I don't remember who posted them, but I remember I sent y'all a text about it. I was super impressed with Phil's dance moves. And so
that's the number one reason to go down Courts and Ports.
Yeah. Number one reason to go on Courts and Ports, you can see Phil dance. So maybe we should sell that as an opportunity one day in silent auction. Anyway, so I'll also just add, just hearing you talk about, doing court by Zoom. I think one of the really valuable components of Courts and Ports was just being able to stand witness in those court proceedings. And so at some point, I think that will probably come back as a component as well. There was a question in the chat that it looks like Sarah has also answered. But Sarah, the schedule right now is out kind of through summer, right? But we anticipate that continuing through the fall and onward. Is that right?
Yes, I think we put up July dates already, or maybe a week or two after. I'm gone the week of July 4th, so I don't know what's happening there. But I think we do have July put up, and then we may have to reassess to see, how are we going to pivot now that things have changed? If things have changed, if not, it'll still continue the way that it goes, court by Zoom and wherever else the needs are in the Valley, which. In Brownsville and McAllen.
All right. Any closing thoughts? Anything I didn't ask you that you really think folks should know before we start to close out today? We've done such a good job. We've covered everything. All right. One more chance. Sarah, remind us where we register. And if anybody else wants to say one more time why folks should go.
Yes, we can register. You can register on the Courts and Ports page on our website, and come be a witness to what's happening on the ground, right? And then be an advocate in your community.
And Sarah's really good at picking restaurants.
No, I'm not.
You are good at picking restaurants.
I'm not.
You'll get that.
It's the most stressful part of the whole trip for me. Because I don't know where people want to eat. Sorry.
Go with your gut.
I will say the camaraderie was really fantastic, and maybe that was because it was one of the first trips we'd all taken in a very long time, but it was just really great to be with Sid and Sarah and Alex and our other friend Neil who went and get to go down and do this work and be a part of it, and to again see firsthand. I think that was a really big part, of just to be able to see firsthand and to bear witness in the court part of it was fantastic. So yeah, I know that as a church we're excited to get more folks down there and be a part of going forward.
And yeah, I want to also, again, just reemphasize the relationships. It was sort of like, I mean, Texas is such a gigantic state, and we're coming from Dallas, and, we picked up a friend in Houston and went the other way, through San Antonio. And it was kind of a reminder, I think, of all of the connectional relations that we had, not just on the border, which I reconnected with a friend, a Methodist friend who went to Presbyterian Seminary with me in the Valley. And there are churches just across that are doing really great work. And this was an opportunity, again, as we're coming out of COVID, to rekindle a lot of those relationships.
Well, it sounds, just based on your camaraderie on this call, that you all did enjoy your time with each other. We have a couple questions in the chat. I just want to forward on to either Sarah or Sid. How many people can you bring on a trip?
6 would be ideal at the most. Once you start to hit 7, 8, 9, it'll get a little crowded in Gladys' office. And also because since the situation at the bus station changes here and there, having 6 people 8, 9 people, including myself, starts to get a lot, especially if there's not a lot of people arriving that day.
And we are still living in a COVID-19 world. Are we requiring any COVID protocols to be able to go down? Do you have to be vaccinated before you go, or what's the deal there?
Yes, you have to be vaccinated. Because 1, for your safety, and then 2, you are interacting with people who are seeking asylum, and they're in large groups, so it's just best.
Right. All right. Well, Sid, Sarah, Alex, Phil, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for the conversation. I can tell you all enjoyed your trip down, and my hope is that many of the people who are listening today will be inspired to take that trip. But it's also important to remember that we don't just do this trip as like a touristy vacation type thing, right, to see what's happening at the border. But the important part is that people go down, they have this experience, and they go back to their congregations and communities and share the stories. Meet with our representatives, both at the federal and state level, share what they saw, and encourage change to improve the lives of people that they've met. So I think that's an important piece to remember moving forward. We hope you make the trip, but we hope you make the trip with a purpose to go back and advocate for change. So thank you all again for joining. Friends, thank you all so much for tuning in today. The legislative session is over, but the work still continues. Make sure you join us over the course of the next 6 weeks as we wrap up the legislative session. Make sure that you are subscribed to Texas Impact social media, to our YouTube channel, and to the Weekly Witness podcast. And y'all, go ahead and make sure you're rating and reviewing the podcast so even more friends can find this content. Nothing lower than a 5-star if that's what your platform uses. And some nice comments. Maybe we'll read some on air in the weeks and months.
Uber driver too.
Hey, just trying to make sure people are engaged in the process. Alex, I don't know. I need to
5 stars.
I know I don't need to tell you because you are already sharing this content with your congregation, friends, and communities. But for everybody else, make sure that you're sharing the content because we want a movement of Texans of faith advocating for a more just and equitable Texas. And so we hope that you and your friends will be a part of that with us. While we're plugging stuff at the end, to make sure that you are signed up to be part of the rapid response team. That group generated thousands and thousands of telephone calls to the representatives during the session. But go ahead and sign up now so you'll get those alerts in the future. And make sure that you're a member of a legislative engagement group so you can be connected with other advocates in your legislative district. If you have questions or need more information about any of this, you can reach out to me at scott@texasimpact.org, and I'll connect you with the appropriate member of our team. And finally, remember, if you appreciate Texas Impact and the work of the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your congregation are members today. You can go to texasimpact.org/join. Friends, it was a really busy 20 weeks of the Texas legislature, but the work still continues today as we thank our representatives for the work that they did, as we hold them accountable for the things that they didn't do so well, as we learn about our communities and issues moving forward. The work continues. So let's get to work.